local band, the Ukus. Deal with that in a second. Ooh, that is really slow, and I don't know why that is. I think I've got a couple test plugins. Actually, we got some alphas and betas coming out. If you guys can do some beta testing, I would love to give these to you. Let me know. Let me just check what's going on. Video project effects. So are we running any AIX TSP? Yes, we are. Okay. Take these out. Remove. Move from project. Move from project. Move from project here. Let me see if this goes a little bit faster. No, it's still really sticky. I don't know what's going on here. That's a horrible performance. Makes it feel like Pro Tools or Cubase or something. That's not how Reaper should feel. Reaper should feel so snappy. Not sure what's going on here. Let's look at the performance meter. Also could be my video card, which actually shouldn't matter. Wow, look at that. What in the world? 67 effects. I don't have so many tracks. Ooh. But still, it's only saying like 4% real-time CPU. That shouldn't be sticky at all. This should be flying. Oh, now it is. All right, I don't know. Okay, I'll deal with that later. All right, sorry. Okay, here we go. I think we got everything running. Let me pull this up. Okay. So this is a video from somebody named Tantacruel, I think. And it's a video called Notation Must Die, The Battle for How We Read Music. So it kind of goes for how music notation started and everything. And I tell you, from somebody who owns a music school, okay, I deal with this all day long. And one of the crazy things is this anti-tablature, like these cork sniffing wine snobs. I'm sure the same guys who believe that different mic preamps magically sound different than each other and different, tube transistor, all this nonsense. The kind of myths we fight all day. It's the same people, I'm sure. People hate tablature. And I have to say that, sorry, but if you're comparing traditional notation and tablature, and you were to make two Venn diagrams. In fact, let's just do that. Let's do a I actually have a white paper. I don't really know how to use it, so I'll deal with that later. Okay, so let's say here is everything that you can make in traditional notation. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to do another color. And this is going to be, as soon as I figure out how to draw with this thing, this is going to be everything that you can do with tablature. All right. There is nothing in traditional notation that you can't show with tablature. And I'm going to pull up Guitar Pro. Okay. So here is tablature for We Rock by Dio, okay? I'm using Guitar Pro here. I'm gonna show both standard notation and tablature, okay? Now there's ways you can overlay these things, whatever. Let me zoom this out a little bit. So I want you to see what we're talking about. So if we here's your standard notation, okay? You know what note it is, but what string do you play it on? Now, it's okay if you're playing really slow stuff to just show the notes or whatever, but a lot of the modern playing that has speed in it has a lot to do with where you play it. How are you clustering your notes? What fingers are you using? What kind of techniques are you using? Bends and all that stuff. I think you can show bends in standard notation, but what about palm mutes? Okay, so what are we missing here? Here's the note. I mean, if you want to see the note, turn on the standard notation. You can still see the note. But if I'm just showing tablature, what am I missing? Here's the length of the note right here. This is an eighth note. These are 16th notes. We already, just like in standard notation. However, here's palm mute. Here's where you play it on the guitar. What fret and what string right here. This tells you what fret and string. Now you could put position markers on standard notation, but it's not going to be as elegant. And if I really wanted to, I could tell you what fingers we're using on everything. So what are you missing? Here's traditional notation, and then this pink circle's got tablature. You can show everything, every single thing in traditional notation you can show in tablature. So that's where we are, okay? Now we're going to hear from this guy, and I learned something very crazy when I was watching this video. So let me play this and listen to what they have to say.
Use of. Anyway, that aside, let's return back to the present to look at the most successful and widely used alternative to standard notation that exists. Prepare to not be surprised. Tablature. In essence, tablature is a physical representation of an instrument that tells you where to put your hands to play a note. For this video, we'll focus on tablature for guitar and piano. Let's start with guitar tab. A typical tab for standard guitar has 6 lines representing each string. These numbers on the strings represent the fret you need to put your finger on to play the desired note. Now, I spend a lot of time thinking about guitar tab because these days I now head up the product direction not just for MuseScore and Audacity.
All right, now check it out. This guy is the product director for Ultimate Guitar. I think. Take a look at this. This looks like Ultimate Guitar, right?
But also for a few more services, including the largest tablature site in the world.
Ultimate Guitar. Okay, so you guys know just how bad Ultimate Guitar has gotten lately. I mean, it is really crap now. You got to go all the way down the bottom page to get to the downloads. You can't see the tabs for the pro stuff anymore. You can't print certain stuff. You can't, they've actually taken out a lot of tabs that used to be downloadable, and now they're in the pro version. The pro version you can't necessarily do the things with that you like. You got to use their app and whatever. So this guy probably somewhat responsible for how crap Guitar Pro Ultimate Guitar has gotten. In fact, I said this explains a lot of why Ultimate Guitar has become so crappy lately. So it's possible this guy's to blame for the stupid choices that have been made in Ultimate Guitar, which is it's pretty much it's like the peer review paper that scientists, or the peer review publication that scientists use, but the guitar version. You'll see a bunch of arguments and things get refined over time. Like it is actual peer review, but for guitar music, or for music in general. And that's the other thing. You can write any kind of music in Guitar Pro that you want. So anyway, this guy's saying that he's part of Ultimate Guitar. So there you go. Already you can tell why this thing's gotten so crappy. Because now we're going to listen to what this guy has to say.
Ultimate Guitar. I'm a fan of tablature because when I started out, it allowed me to really easily learn to play songs I liked. And
so here comes the backhanded compliments, right? Oh, tablature lets me do this easy thing. Well, not so much.
I'm a fan of tablature because when I started out, it allowed me to really easily learn to play songs I liked. And if that's your goal, to learn how to play songs because you've no need for sight reading or music theory, tablature is probably all you'll ever need.
All right. There's nothing about tablature that's going to hurt you for sight reading or music theory. It's just another representation of the same notes. And, like I said, this is going to be a backhanded compliment, and from a guy who probably ruined Ultimate Guitar. So
that's what it allowed me to really easily learn to play songs I liked.
And it was so terrible to learn how to play songs. I mean, I read standard notation because I want to look at squiggles on a paper, not to learn songs. You know, what the hell is this guy even saying?
If that's your goal, to learn how to play songs because you've no need for sight reading or music theory.
All right, again, nothing about tablature prohibits you from sight reading or music theory any more than standard notation does. You got, when you make claims like this, you got to show your work. He's not showing his work. You made a claim. Let's see the evidence for it.
Tablature is probably all you'll ever need. That's why it's so successful. So, what's the main difference between...
No, it's so successful because it tells you not just what standard notation tells you, but it also tells you where on the guitar to play this thing and possibly what fingers to use. And again, a host of other symbols that may or may not be in standard notation. Like a lot of, I know this like slurs and ties and stuff, but a lot of the guitar specific techniques you don't really see in standard notation.
Tab and notation? Well, first, tab only makes sense for the instrument you currently play. Guitar.
Okay, that's true. Tablature only makes sense for the instrument you currently play. Sort of. It'll go between guitar and bass. Anything that's tuned kind of the same. But what you really need to say to make this accurately is a piece of tablature will only be accurate for the instrument that it was written for. Sort of. Because, you know, you could play a 6-string part on a 7-string, etc. But fine. That's what it is. It's a part for that instrument. Sorry, that is really specific, but that's why it's precise.
Guitar tab doesn't work for any other instrument, but the differences go further than that. Specifically, tablature does not help you build up an understanding of what notes you're actually playing.
Wrong. Tablature doesn't not let you understand notes any more than standard notation doesn't let you not understand what notes you're playing. You could have this thing, you know, the beauty of tab is it doesn't matter what you're tuned to. You could make all new tunings and stuff and still make it work. But you're going to see the same. I mean, do you know what notes you're playing? I mean, yes, standard notation shows you the exact note you're playing, but it's still relative. I mean, just having notes in a vacuum doesn't really tell you anything. It's relative to what's going on in the song.
This number tells me to put my finger on the 3rd fret of this string, fine. But what note is it? From personal experience, I can tell you that as
it actually, sorry, but you do know what note that is. You'll know the tuning of the guitar. You can figure it out from there. But you know what? Oh, man, it's so terrible. I can't tell what note this is. What note is this? Oh, oops, I clicked this button here. Now I can see the notes. Oh, no, that was so terrible. I mean, obviously it's inferior. Hey, now, sarcasm on.
I got better at playing guitar, tabs started to kind of hold me back. When I was a kid,
No, how did tabs hold you back? Now, I could see standard notation holding you back because you see a bunch of notes and you don't know which strings to play it on and how to cluster it, and you get really frustrated and you start doing this one finger thing up and down the neck. How in the world did tabs hold you back? You're full of crap. It's sad that this is the guy that has something to do with Ultimate Guitar. You should have nothing to do with Ultimate Guitar. You should be allowed nowhere near Ultimate Guitar. And yeah, I could say a lot more, but I think I'd get in trouble.
I can tell you that as I got better at playing guitar, tabs started to kind of hold me back.
No, they
When
didn't.
I was a kid, jamming with other musicians, if they told me they were playing chords with an A or a D sharp, I'd have to spend a few seconds looking at my guitar to figure out where those notes were.
And that wouldn't be any different if you learned on standard notation. Get out of here.
I didn't just automatically know, and it's harder to build up that closer connection to your instrument if you rely solely on tab.
No, it's not. How is that? You've got to bring this evidence. You're full of crap. You're absolutely full of crap. Tablature, okay, how about this? I will guarantee you that any of these kids that grew up learning guitar off of YouTube and tablature run circles around people who got taught by cork sniffers. Look, I got a music school here. I have kids that are shredders. I have kids that aren't. The kids who take their time to learn with properly formatted tablature absolutely decimate the kids who don't. And it's not just a little thing. It's actually something that causes some amount of trouble with the parents. Just how much better these kids are. Okay, so you're full of crap. Absolutely
With
full
notation,
of crap.
as you progress, you begin to internalize many aspects of performance, learning what key you're in and knowing what each of these symbols mean.
It's no different than tablature. You're full of crap.
musically. And after a while, your hands just know where to go because
No, they
you
don't.
know-
No, they don't. Okay, now, anybody who says this kind of crap, I can tell where to put my hands by sight reading. Okay, you can play some cowboy chords and you can do some, Nirvana or something, right? Some Led Zeppelin. You're going to get annihilated if you try and play any sort of modern music. You're just absolutely, there's no, I know how my hands go because I saw it in the standard notation. Bull crap. You're full of crap. And I guarantee any of these little kids will wail on you if you're talking like that. Absolutely. I've got 10-year-olds that will beat your ass into the ground for talking like that.
where the notes are. So in a nutshell, tablature tells you where to put your fingers, whereas notation just tells you what the music is.
No, tablature tells you what the music is. You're full of crap. Absolutely full of crap. I can't believe Ultimate Guitar has anything to do with you. You are full of crap.
Another advantage of notation is that it facilitates other skills. If you have ambitions to sight read, write music for ensembles, study theory, conduct, or play multiple instruments, notation is universal.
You can still do that with tablature. You're full of crap.
You learn it for one instrument, now you can read notation for all instruments.
That's true. You learn notation for one instrument, you can learn it for all instruments. Again, so you can with tab though. You're full of crap, dude. Sorry.
But there's more, and this is specifically related to sight reading. Once you get used to notation, it's way faster because we read it in a similar way to how we read text. When we become accustomed to reading,
You do the exact same thing with tablature.
we're able to recognize the shape of words quickly.
You can do the exact same thing with tablature. How many of you guys know what kind of scale is being used just by looking at the tab? Same way as you do with standard notation.
Skipping the need to process every individual letter, this ability is called chunking. Although notation has some differences to the written language, musicians use a similar process. For example, if we look at this up and down movement of notes, the reader is able to grasp a wider sense of direction quickly, and the brain doesn't need to pause to consider each note. If you wrote this in tablature, the eye needs
Oh my god. Okay. Let's play this again.
direction quickly. And if we look, notation has some differences to the written language, musicians use a similar process. For example, if we look at this up and down movement of notes, the reader is able to grasp a wider sense of direction quickly, and the brain doesn't need to pause to consider each note. If you wrote this in tablature, the eye needs to read each number individually so you know exactly where to put your hand. You can't
No. You can see the trend right there. Like, oh my god. This guy is full of crap. Absolutely full of crap.
skim it. It's way harder to sight read because it contains more information. It's pictographic, not symbolic. And symbols,
It's symbolic and pictographic.
for example, these symbols you are reading right now, can be much more efficiently read once you get used to them. Again, I need to reinforce this point. Pictograms are generally more immediately intuitive than symbols because symbols are abstract. You need to learn what they mean. But it's precisely this abstraction that gives musical symbols so much power. Once you know what they mean, and once your hands know where to go,
Your hands don't know where to go with standard notation. That's the number one complaint from me, anyway. They don't know where to go. Because it doesn't tell you that.
connect you much more directly to written music, and you can process it much
You're
faster.
full of
God,
crap.
this is turning.
I can't believe this guy is part of Ultimate Guitar. This guy has no business being anywhere near that site. And, like I say, how crappy that site has become lately, it's probably because this idiot.
Into an undergrad semiotics essay. So what about Guitar Hero?
I know. That's even dumber. Okay. So there's goes by some other types of notations here. There's some kind of neat stuff that I haven't seen before. You just play the best of all the rest here. Let's see.
Now, as much as I'd love to spend another hour going through a ton of other systems, I do fear for your brain, so I thought I'd just cycle through a couple of other proposed reforms quickly before tying everything up in my conclusion. Hummingbird. This one is a relatively recent proposal, and I find it quite baffling. These weird balls have shading that indicates pitch, even though they're still represented vertically a la standard notation. It's like the authors couldn't choose between one idea over the other, so just used both. The squiggly bits represent sharps or flats, durations have a little line, which is meant.
Okay, that does look worse than standard notation. What is this Julian Carrillo's system? This kind of looks interesting. Let me see.
There'll be a video about it one day. For maximum whiplash, let's now look at what is, for my money, probably the most logical and convincing outright replacement reform I think I've seen. It was proposed by Julian Carrillo, an influential microtonal composer, in 1895. First, the 12 pitches of the octave are represented by numbers. Middle range pitches are placed on the central line. If they're displayed on a lower space, they're an octave lower. Another space down, an octave lower again. A space up, an octave higher, etc. And that's it. No need for flat or sharp symbols or clefs, and it's way more vertically efficient, as can be seen by comparing this notated example with Carrillo's proposed system. For sure, it would mean that we'd have to recalibrate our relationship to music theory. For example, you'd need to learn that 269 is a D major chord, 259 is a D minor chord, etc. It messes with our heads now, but it's completely sensible, and the numeric relationship would always be consistent. Another reason Carrillo created this system was so that it could accommodate different tuning systems and microtonality too. For example, using 24-tone equal temperament, or you could represent quarter tones with decimals or fractions, etc. The two probable downsides I can see are difficulties in understanding what key you're in, or in what key you're modulating to. But if I was to pick out the issue that might cause the most trouble, my guess is it would be how chords are visualized. I just don't know how easy it would.
That's kind of cool, though. Let's see what else kind of insanity they got here.
It's pitch, even though they're still represented used both long they last. These extra adjacent line useful, but it's or notation shorthand. This is not one proposal in particular, it's an entire genre. I'm not showing these here because I think they need to be assessed. I just think they're fun.
I've actually seen
in
this
1802,
before.
John
Did they talk about Nashville numbering in here? Piano roll actually makes sense. We use that in MIDI, right? I can actually read piano roll pretty well. That's kind of sad.
Proposed these symbols for pitch and these symbols for duration, which would alter this notation to look like this. Another, from Harry White in 1899, would represent this notation like this. And my favourite, in 1873, Alex M. Seamat proposed the use of these symbols to represent pitch, which means this notation would look like this. Global notation is a recent proposal by Dr. Andrew Killick from the Department of Music at the University of Sheffield. Its purpose is to provide, quote, a more realistic picture of what listeners actually hear. By using a complex grid to represent pitch, pitch variation, note events, and time, pitch is represented by cents and duration is, again, relative. By being this technical and literal, it aims to be able to notate music from all cultures. It was initially proposed as a new way to write music, accompanied by the boilerplate notation whinge you come to expect. However, from a performer's point of view, it is far less legible than many other proposals we've already looked at. One particularly awkward thing about it is how the staff lines change depending on the pitch ranges used, which means the performer can never rely on memory to know what each line means in any given piece, so they'd have to constantly reference the cent numbers on the left to know what pitch they're supposed to play. Also, there's a weirdness in its basic premise. If it's supposed to represent
doesn't it look like an auto-tune grid?
What the listener actually hears, then the performance must have already happened, so it seems to me to be more of an aid to an existing audio recording rather than an instruction on how to perform in the first place. And the goals of global notation have narrowed since. As of 2021, its stated purpose is purely academic, a tool to be used in the analysis of non-Western music.
Okay, we heard
Certainly there are many chromatic music as a
right.
forward system used successfully in early stage learning in China. It's essentially a variation of the tonic sol fa system, where do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti are replaced by numbers. Dots are placed above or below to indicate whether the octave should be higher or lower. Although it superficially looks similar to Carrillo's system, it is completely different, more suitable for basic music with obvious limitations once you go beyond that. However, it's really popular in China, so worthy of a deeper investigation as a potential early aid. So, after all this investigating, what conclusions can we come to? Well, before I get to that, I just want to talk about this channel for a second. If you've been with me for a while, out each year. If this is something you're interested in, support Nebula, where I'll say, with Patreon you successes. Due to Eurovision TV, who didn't like me making fun of them a few years ago. That's right, I have 2 Eurovision videos. The second one in particular is an all-time favourite of mine, where I look at the musical and lyric. My first hit on found a system I believe should replace standard notation. Do we really have to just accept that things should never change? Well, no. As we've seen earlier, the development of notation happened very slowly for around 600 years, but it didn't stop 2 or 3 centuries ago. Various changes still slowly happen, with older, more ornate...
Yeah, I mean, standard notation is often updated with, modern stuff. I've even seen like volume, like wah pedal things and stuff, but who knows? I don't know how standardized that standard is.
systems gradually becoming simplified. Now, in the 20th century, there was an explosion of adapted notation systems created to accommodate different types of music. Microtonal music, free metered music, and aleatoric music particularly stand out. I created a video about aleatoric music a few years ago if you're interested. There are also all kinds of bespoke scores like those created by Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, which combined elements of standard notation with different types of graphic visualization to achieve specific musical effects. In these scores, you can often spot many ideas from some of the proposals we've looked at in this video. There are also many kinds of abstract notation too, which introduce varying degrees of ambiguity to prompt novel types of musical performance. Some scores are works of art in their own right. However, the move to digital around the 80s and 90s was slow and clunky, and I also feel contributed to halting some of these 20th century developments, since digital applications simply couldn't accommodate much experimentation. This is true even today. However, digital apps will catch up.
Wait, what? How do... This guy is so full of crap. All right, I'm sorry. I'm done playing this idiot. All right, there's something else from Phil Zio. He's doing, long-time friend of the channel, sometimes guest. Here's Phil Zio. He's talking about, does rendering degrade quality? And right off the bat, you might be thinking, are you talking about the summing myth? Sort of. I mean, if you're just rendering straight render, then yeah, that would be. So he says it's called breaking down the myth. So let me play this and let's just take a look here.
I'm Phil from One Wall Studio, and I'm here today to dispel a myth that lossless files degrade. I've gotten a comment recently saying that with digital, much like tape, the quality of a file will degrade over time, and also with subsequent tapings or renderings.
So, first of all, how in the world are ones and zeros going to degrade over time? I mean, if they're stored to a physical medium and no error correction or whatever, sure. But no. And subsequent taping, that's called copying. So think about this. You make a zip file and you send it to your friend over the internet. If it's not exactly the same file that you sent, it won't even open. It's going to say that there's an error in the archive. I mean, we can copy stuff all day long in digital. Nothing's going to happen. But this is how crazy, and this is why this channel exists, because this is how crazy people are. They believe this crap. These are the same guys that talk about how some microphones made out of stuff that can't ever be made again. So this magical old microphone's always going to be better than any new microphone. Same nonsense.
Now, I have here a lossless file that I just threw together real quickly in the heat of the moment, and I have the song titled It's the Same Every Time. It's only a 1 minute long track. Here's what we're going to do today. First, I'm going to break off why this myth exists, and second off, I'm going to dispel the myth with an absurd amount of rendering. So I'm mostly going to skip through a lot of it because rendering isn't super exciting to look at, but I am going to use all of the techniques available to me in order to dispel this myth or break down that myth. All right, so first things first, I'm going to show you why this myth might exist by rendering this to MP3 approximately 8 times. Importantly, I'm going to be doing this to MP3 so that we can see what happens and the difference between a lossless and a lossy rendering. One fun thing I'm going to do to make this a lot easier on myself is click the Add Rendered Items to New Track in Project button here on the render dialog so that every time I do this, it just tosses it in here and we continue to render in the most lossy way possible. I am curious to hear the difference between 8 times MP3 encoding and lossless. And already we're beginning to see some changes. Multiple encoding processes of MP3, a lossy format, are starting to incur some clipping. And on the 5th pass, there's more clipping than there was before in the 4th pass. But there was none in the original. Now here we are finally at pass 8. So pass 8 should sound significantly different than pass 1 because we've re-rendered it to a lossy format 8 times. Okay, let's hear the difference between the lossless and the lossy. So even though I've rendered it 8 times, I was rendering it at the maximum possible quality as afforded by MP3. So there's not a ton of difference. There's a little bit more sizzle in the high end in the lossless version, and it feels a little bit less compressed, even though it's a pretty smashed master. So one thing I like to do is I like to take these, do the null test to invert them, and see how much different the 8th pass is.
So we're going to hear now. So what he's doing is he's putting one completely out of phase, out of polarity, whichever one you pedants want to fight about. And so if these were both lossless files, this would completely null. You wouldn't hear anything. So whatever you're going to hear now is just going to be the difference between the two files.
From the original wave. You can really see that the high end in particular was massively affected by the wave and by the MP3 encoding.
But notice that difference is like 42 decibels down, right? So you're probably going to hear it. If you're really critical and sat there and ABX'd it for a long time, you're probably going to hear, you could probably identify some differences, but it still sounds pretty damn close, doesn't it?
Because this is what it sounds like when you hear the difference.
And that's 8 passes. That's 8 encodes of this lossy format.
Of washiness in the top end, which is common amongst MP3s. But you also have some low end getting lost as well.
It's so far down there, though.
So that washiness is what happens when you do lossy encoding. In this case, 8 times in a row. Now let's try and see how much the original differs from the very first MP3 recording.
It's a lot less, huh?
By the 8th recording, the digital noise incurred by the lossy encoding process 8 times over has gotten a lot louder. We see a massive gain in digital noise that doesn't affect you too much while you're listening to the MP3 itself, but it is noticeable if you try to null it against the original. So that's 8 times lossy decoding at the best possible bitrate that you can get with MP3. Now let's try this a different way. First things first, I'm going to try this again in an extremely lossy way. Instead of being at a maximum bitrate, I'm going to try and get it to a constant bitrate, and I'm just going to make it the fastest encode possible and make it about 192 kilobits per second, which is what you'd get on
I mean, I'd put it at 128 because that's still what so many of us are used to using, right?
Spotify. So let's render this and let's start this process one more time. But let's see how much different it'll be if I get an average bitrate as opposed to the best possible bitrate afforded us by MP3. And already we're beginning to see true peak clips on only the second pass of lossy.
Yeah, if you guys don't know what he's saying,
an average bit.
You'll see this when he's in the render. You'll see little red lines. Reaper marks those red overs as red lines.
Great. Very cool. Not as many as I was expecting, though. And now it's going backwards in terms of peaking. There are now fewer peaks and clips than there were in the second and third encoding, and now there's only 2. Let's see if it gets rid of all of them on the 8th.
No, it's still 1 there.
Ooh, still 2. All right, so now let's solo the last one, the 8th one, and hear how much different it is from the lossless.
Kind of chunked out, huh?
Oh, that's terrible.
Let's see the null test. Ooh, swirling birdies.
Absolutely disgusting.
See, that's what we call space monkeys or swirling birdies, right? You hear that washiness?
So let's hear how it sounds if we were to null test this baby. Keep in mind, this is 8 passes.
So remember, the other one was like 42 dB down of difference. Let's see where this is.
Of lossy encoding at only 192 kilobits per second per encode. So let's do this.
Way higher, right? And across the board as well. It's not just one little peak here and a little bit on the base. It is across the board.
Oh, you can see that almost the entire song
You can almost hear the song
is
fine.
different.
That's when you know it's bad.
That's horrific. What about each step of the way? But by the end, almost the whole thing is just disgusting wash and noise. Oh, listen to that. That terrible crushing. Compared to the original? All right, so we all knew that that would happen because that's a very lossy encoding method. However, and this is where it's going to get fun, let's try yet one more time, but this time we're doing it lossless. So I'm going to choose the exact same bit depth and the exact same format and the exact same everything I possibly can in order to show you that when you render losslessly, no matter how many times you render that export, it should theoretically maintain the exact same quality and perfectly null.
Here's the biggie.
So let's try it out, shall we? Are you keeping an eye on the detailed information from the renders? We've got one more to go. If you don't mind, make your predictions in the comments below and see if...
Unless you or Reaper screwed something up, when you do the null test, we're going to hear Jack Diddley.
this works out the way that we hope it will. All right, the moment of truth has come. I have rendered and re-rendered 8 times the exact same file in WAV format with the exact same parameters as the file was initially rendered in. So let's see if there's a difference between the 8th pass of rendering with a null test. And would you look at that? It is playing and nothing is coming out.
So, you know, the stuff we were talking about from Safe Space earlier, where these guys are like claiming that these mic preamps all sound so amazingly different and they can hear the difference. And then when I ask them, how much money do you want to put up to do a test to bet? I'll put the test up, but how much do you want to bet whether or not you can hear the difference between these things reliably and tell me which one is which? They never can. They just insult you and run away. That's how that works. Complete null.
After 8 passes of lossless rendering, it has perfectly nulled. I guess that dispels that myth, or breaks that myth down for you. Now, if you want to know why that is, I can explain it to you in a couple of words. So here I have every single version of the project that we worked on thus far in their own little tabs up here in order to show you what I mean. So the first thing is first. The original lossless WAV file has all of the information as rendered by the DAW. It is lossless, so what goes out is exactly what goes into this file. So the stereo bus render is identical to the project file, the session file, whatever you want to call it. And it will null if you were to take it, export it, drop it into the original session, do some tweaking so that it doesn't interface with the master bus, and then you were to null it. It just would unless you had nonlinear effects causing any differences between the session at one point in time versus another. Some analog.
Yeah, like let's say you got a chorus that, you know, the LFO is going, you know, 2 different times. You might get some different. But if you're putting the exact same thing into it, you're going to get the exact same thing out.
Modeling plugins do introduce nonlinear elements like noise or a variable curve for compression or distortion that will cause it to act a little bit different every time you open it up, kind of like analog did. But barring those exceptions, this render will be the exact same if you render it from the original session multiple times. The farther you get from the original, though, when it comes to encoding and recoding over and over again, the way they null is very minute. And you can hear that in the ending piece right here, where you can see ever so slightly a higher noise floor caused by the MP3 encoding. Same thing with the opening. Before there's any sound at all, there's noise generated by how many respective MP3 renders this has undergone. You'll notice that this phenomenon is especially powerful when you're comparing the lossiest version to the least lossy version. So if we were to solo this and this.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy how the 320 was so close at the end anyway, you know.
The loss
Whereas the 192 really got the swirling birdies and space monkeys going.
Dynamic range also actually causes a difference in the volume level, even on the quietest noises. So over here, you actually see that it's at like negative 36.1, and this is at negative 34.2. So what that means is there's been about 2 decibels lost of information from even this tiny quiet moment. And when you look at it that way, that means that it's going through a lot of throwing out bits and smoothing them over, replacing them with digital noise to some extent that creates that washy effect that you're used to hearing from too many layers of lossy encoding. So the huge difference that you hear in these sections, you also notice that you've lost overall 1 to 2 decibels in the most loud parts, while at other times you're gaining noisier decibels. That volume difference is caused by the MP3 encoding going in and stripping information in order to create a smaller file. Now it does that every single time without fail. On the main one, you have a higher bit rate. We've had it set to 320 kilobytes per second. However, with an even lossier bit depth and bit rate, you're going to get an even smaller file, but it's still going to keep making that file smaller the same way as it did before. So you're always going to end up with the same bit rate per second in the final file size. But what it's doing is it's re-rendering, and each time it's finding different things to do to get it down to that size. It's going to keep crushing certain aspects of it in a lossy way, thereby increasing the amount of information lost, which is why it's called lossy, because you're losing a lot of information every single time you render to MP3 at a much lower bit depth. Because at 192 kilobits per second, you're literally taking a stream that, when it's a WAV file, might at the lowest be 2,116 kilobits per second. And you're cutting it down to literally 9% of the size of.
It's amazing that stuff sounds that good considering how much you're chewing it up.
The file, which means you're getting rid of so much. And because MP3 as a format isn't smart when you're encoding to it, it's not like it's going to look in and say, oh, wait, this is already encoded to a lower bit depth and a bit rate. You're literally going in and tossing things out every time to make it that file size. So it's just going to keep doing the same things over and over again until eventually it's so artifacted that it is impossible to hear in a normal way, as you could see by the amount of wash that happened after 8 respective passes. So all that to be said, it doesn't matter how many times you render a WAV file, because you're going to get a lossless file out of it. You're going to get the same size of file every time, provided it's going to be the same format, same bit depth, same sample rate, because
Make sure you set
you're
those
not
parameters.
losing anything. But MP3 is going to continually make the same adjustments and
And remember, there are people out there that insist that songs sound different even if they null. So that's what you're dealing with. Not exactly the reality-based community.
compression choices every respective time to ensure that it's the same file size time after time again at a lower sample rate or bit depth or whatever you're rendering down to. It makes the same choices over and over again. Now, this all depends, of course, on your encoder and what your encoder choices are. And as you could see initially, doing the maximum possible bit rate doesn't get rid of as much information time and time again as going for a lower bit rate. And ultimately, you'll find that there is a lot that you can do with MP3s unless they're a lower bit rate. So if you were to render MP3s to WAV, you'd actually get no difference between the MP3 that you rendered and a WAV file. So let me demonstrate that right now, because once you've lost it, you can't gain it back. But because it's a lossless format, it should theoretically...
I thought MP3 is a perceptual type of codec, I think. So I'd actually be surprised if it will it no. That'd be interesting.
Be no different than the MP3 you rendered it from, and it nulls perfectly.
Wow. Okay.
Because a lossless file will always null with whatever you used to render it. Now, there are a couple of minor exceptions here. You'll notice that there's little bursts, especially right around here. Where there's a slight difference, and possibly just a simple encoding error. Notice that the volume levels are the same.
Oh, it's interesting.
They completely null. So with that in mind, if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them in the comments below. If you have any other myths that you'd like me to dispel, or any other problems that you want to see solved from an audio standpoint.
On YouTube. Right here, Phil Zeo, ZEO. And he's got plenty of stuff. He also has a bunch of videos with mixing, like breaking down mixes and stuff you can download yourself and mix. So anyways, that's gonna be it for me tonight. I'll be mixing this Uku song in a little bit. I got a little bit to look at, and then that'll be my night.